Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today we're doing a spicy black bean kung pao chicken that's based off of a recipe that I had written a while back, trying to hack the Panda Express kung pao chicken recipe. That was maybe back in like November or so. I think that was back in November or December. And this is the version, this is the alternate version that I had written, which uses a couple more additional ingredients that don't necessarily pop up quite as much in like traditional or like straight ahead American foods. I guess namely the predominant thing that we're going to be using that you probably won't find very often in Chinese American cuisine is spicy black bean paste, which is the ingredient that you very, very frequently find in Chinese dajiaomian, which is actually what we made on stream last night. So that's going to be really interesting because it's not really something that you find in stir fries quite a bit, but this is actually a recipe that I've been trying out quite a bit, and I think it actually works really well because it gives a nice little bit more umami and a little bit more of an interesting flavor than you would normally come across in a more straight ahead kung pao chicken. So we're going to take a look at that, and we're also going to kind of explore a couple of different ways that you can vary on this recipe because essentially a kung pao chicken is basically just a big vegetable stir fry with chicken in it, so you can add whatever you happen to have in the refrigerator. Today I'm going to be adding a couple of vegetables that are not in the original recipe because they happen to be what I found at the grocery store today, so that's going to be what we're working off of. If you have any questions for me, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about kung pao chicken, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative. As with pretty much everything else that I cook on stream, this particular dish has a recipe that goes along with it. It's part of a larger whole series of recipes that I've been writing that are dedicated to reproducing foods from Chinese American cuisine. So a whole bunch of Panda Express recipes have popped up on that series. And essentially what I've been doing is kind of deconstructing Panda Express and like P.F. Chang's and like really Americanized Chinese food and seeing what it looks like when we remove all of those American qualities and then replace them with like a traditional approach to Chinese food and kind of like what does that look like. So if you're interested in finding out more about that stuff, I'd recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel, which if you're watching on Reddit would be the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. Lots of fun content over there, including all of the recipes that I cook here and also a concurrent live stream. So if you're looking behind me, there's a laptop behind me. That laptop streams to YouTube, and I've been told it doesn't freeze as much, so if you're looking for that, that's all over on YouTube, which is youtube.com/WuCanCook. Lots of fun stuff going on over there. Okay, so as with pretty much every stir fry that I do now, I'm starting off with 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, followed by some finely minced ginger. When you're working with ginger, you'll notice that I very frequently like to peel my ginger. I pretty much always peel my ginger these days. But the only reason that I peel the ginger is because I haven't really washed it, which means that we don't really know what's on the ginger. But if your ginger is fresh enough, you actually don't need to peel it. That skin is totally edible. and it's just like a part of. It just looks really gnarly because ginger is a root vegetable. But if you're confident that your ginger is clean, and you don't, if you've washed it, I guess you can totally eat the skin. The only time where I really advocate for peeling ginger is if your ginger is really old, because then that skin, it can get really tough and gross, and then that's probably when you probably want to be peeling the ginger. I'll probably just leave that. But otherwise, you can totally eat that skin, which is what I'm doing right now. Yeah, actually, though, if your ginger is really old, you probably shouldn't be eating it. I have definitely eaten my fair share of old ginger, though. So, ginger also has a really long shelf life. So, if you've never worked with ginger before, it has like a shelf life of at least like 3 or 4 weeks if you don't put it in the refrigerator. If you put it in the refrigerator, even longer than that. Alright, so also the last thing I'll mention is today we're doing a fine mince on our ginger. If you don't particularly like doing fine minces, or if you're particularly averse to doing knife work in general, you can also put this stuff through a microplane and it will work just as well too. I personally, when I use a microplane for my ginger, or like really any like solid ingredients like this, I like to just do it straight into the wok or the pot. Because once you start grating it, it sort of starts falling apart. So like a lot of the juice of the ginger will start like out. So that means that if you do it and then store it in a mise en place dish like this, you're gonna lose something because it's gonna leave behind in the dish. So, but also microplanes, they're really annoying to clean. So if you're like me and you don't like cleaning your microplane, I probably only use my microplane if like I'm grating Parmesan cheese. That might be the only time that I use my microplane. Otherwise, I avoid using it like the plague. Alright, so next up, we're chopping up some green onions here. So what I'm going to do here is separate these. So I don't do this every time that I use green onions, but I do it a lot because the two different parts of a green onion behave very differently. So you'll notice that the thicker portion of our green onion, so this is the white end of our green onion, they look like this. It's a lot more thick and durable than the leafy portion, so this would be the greens of our green onions. It's a lot more leafy, a little bit less durable, and not quite as resilient to heat. So what I like doing most of the time that I work with a green onion is separating them. So I'm going to slice up the whites here first, and these are going to go into our wok fry with our aromatic elements, so with the garlic and ginger. Because they're a little bit thicker, a little bit more durable, and a little bit more capable of withstanding the really aggressive wok heat that we're going to be cooking in. If we were to try and do that with the greens of a green onion, nothing would really happen. It would pretty much just kind of fall apart in the wok heat. So not the end of the world, but there is something more substantial that we can do with the greens of your green onions, which is use them as a garnish, which I love doing. Anytime that I don't have another plan for a garnish, really, I probably will do that with the greens of my green onions, because they work a lot better. Because if we don't cook them, then they have a little bit more crunch and like a little bit more presence, especially if we leave them on and put them at the very last end. Is a chive a part of the onion family? I believe so. I'm pretty sure yes. I don't know that for sure though. I would assume yes, because it has a bulb at the end. So that would be my gut guess is yes, because it has a bulb at the end. Yeah, you do believe so. Cool. Yeah. All right. So for the greens, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to slice these on a bias. So a bias essentially means fancy word for a diagonal. So I'm cutting these diagonally in this direction. And what happens is when you chop the greens of your green onions on a bias, you end up with a wider and like larger piece of green that will sit with like a little bit more bite in your final dish than if you were to cut it just straight. So the way that it ends up looking, it's a little bit like this. It's also really pretty, so it's really nice like presentation. But really what it ends up doing is it like has a more of a physical presence in your final dish. So as garnishes the bias cut, it works really well because it kind of sits larger, and you can since it sits it's more physically present in the garnish of your dish. Then you can taste it more because it's more present. Cool. So we're setting all of this aside. I'm going to be particularly careful about this element because these greens, they are not actually going to get cooked. So we're going to pay attention. For food safety, we'll want to be very careful that your garnishes, anything that's not going to get cooked, you want to be particularly careful that this doesn't come into contact with your raw meats. Pretty much everything shouldn't come into contact with your raw meats. But especially if it's not being cooked, you want to be careful because that's how cross-contamination happens. Jasmine rice, yeah. Today I'm cooking with jasmine rice. If you've tuned into these streams before, you'll probably have seen me cooking with brown rice quite a bit. And that's because at one point I bought a 10-pound, or I got a 10-pound bag of brown rice. I don't think I bought it. Maybe I did buy it actually. And I think it was at one point I was just like, I'm going to be healthy. I'm going to eat brown rice. And then actually I was doing that for quite a while. And one day I bought some jasmine rice, and then I realized how much better jasmine rice is. It's so much better. And honestly, brown rice is not that more healthy for you anyway. So, but for a while though, I was eating brown rice for like at least a year because I bought so much of it. But yeah, today brown rice. Today we're using jasmine rice. There are a lot of different kinds of rices. I would say in the realm of Chinese food, the most common ones that you'll come across are either jasmine rice or long grain rice. So very, very often when you're in a Chinese restaurant, you won't find jasmine rice because it's a lot more expensive than the alternative, which is long grain rice. Long grain rice is really, really cheap to buy, so you can, if you're in the grocery store, you can compare them, and by pound it's a little bit cheaper. So in a restaurant, very, very, very often what you'll find is long grain rice because it's a lot cheaper. But it is also a little bit less fluffy, so it has like a little bit less. Yeah, it's just like not as fluffy, not quite as like airy and moist in the way that jasmine rice is. So that like if you have ever compared like takeout rice versus like jasmine rice or the rice that you cook at home, that's probably the difference. Is that most of the time when we buy rice and eat it at home, it's probably jasmine rice because it's a little bit more tasty and a little bit more fluffy too. Yeah. Ooh, cool. Lots of folks joining. Hello. Hello, everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today we are cooking a Kung Pao chicken that's based off of a recipe hack that I had written for Panda Express's Kung Pao chicken that was, I think, back in October or November now. And that recipe had a second version. Every time that I do one of those Chinese American hack recipes, I'll usually do a second version. That second version usually incorporates a few more things that you won't often find in Chinese American food. So in particular today what we are using that you almost certainly won't find in Chinese American cuisine is black bean paste. Black bean paste is probably the most predominant ingredient in the Chinese noodle dish called dajiaomian, which is actually what we cooked on stream yesterday. I have started using it in stir fries quite a bit, especially when I'm like trying to figure out different ways of doing Chinese American foods because it's a really, really interesting flavor to incorporate in stir fries. And is also probably not something that you will come across in like straight ahead Chinese American food. So we're going to be experimenting a little bit with that. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to keep on dropping those questions in the chat. Always super stoked to answer as many questions as I can follow along with, at least. If you're interested in finding the recipe for this, so the recipe that I'm talking about, it's part of a larger series that we've been doing in which I've been deconstructing a whole bunch of Chinese American cuisine. So a lot of that involves Panda Express, but also so I've been doing a lot of things from Panda Express and PF Chang's in particular. And essentially what I've been doing is taking a look at Chinese American foods as it presents itself in America, at least. And kind of taking a look at what are the things that happened to Chinese food when it came to America. Like what were those things? What were Chinese people doing in order to make Chinese food palatable to Americans? And a lot of times what I find when I'm hacking Chinese American dishes is I find myself adding a lot more sugar than you normally would in a Chinese dish. Lots of times that's sugar, or sometimes even that can be like spice or just like generally sauce, like making things really, really saucy. Those tend to be like the things that I add a lot of. And then in those dishes, I usually do a second version in which I will deconstruct that American version and then reconstruct it without all of those American qualities. So it's really interesting to me to do that because a lot of times Chinese American food is not really American, or it's not really Chinese anymore. It's basically just American food. So that's really interesting to reconstruct it without its American qualities because it's very unusual to see what's left, because most of the time when you remove all of the American qualities, there's not much left. So if you're interested in stuff like that, that all lives over on the YouTube channel. So if you're watching on Reddit, that would be the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen, which is youtube.com/woocancook. Lots of fun content over there. We've done a whole bunch of stuff from Panda Express. So I've done Kung Pao chicken was, I think, back in November. We also did the honey sesame chicken, General Tso's chicken, Beijing beef, the Mushu pork from P.F. Chang's, and one that's coming up is the Mongolian beef from P.F. Chang's. That's coming up, I think, in 2 weeks. And that's going to be super, super tasty. So if you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel and check out what's going on over there. Lots of fun recipes. Those are out every Friday, so every Friday there's a brand new one, which means tomorrow is going to be marble tea eggs. That's going to be super fun. Marble tea eggs, I've been eating those since I was a little kid. In addition to all of the recipes, that's also where the concurrent live stream lives. So that live stream, the one that's happening behind me, that all lives over on YouTube. The one on YouTube has a schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking. So if you're interested in finding out what I'm going to be cooking within the next couple of weeks, that all lives over on YouTube too. So you can find that whole schedule over on YouTube. Yeah, how much different is authentic Chinese food versus Chinese American food? Yeah, it's super interesting. So it kind of depends on where you're eating. A lot of times the things that you find in like Chinese American cuisine is not really even Chinese anymore. And they like a lot of those places will fully own up to that. They're not really even making Chinese food anymore. Even like sometimes at like P.F. Chang's, I noticed that they have like pad Thai, which is not that's specifically not Chinese. That it's in the name. It's Thai food. Like, so that's always super interesting because a lot of times it's like just straight up not Chinese food at all, and not even of Chinese culture. So that's always super interesting. But what I have discovered is a lot of the times when you like really like take a look at what Chinese food is, a lot of the things that like what happens to it are the things that people are doing in order to make them palatable to Americans is amplifying the things that like are really, really popular in America. So a lot of times that ends up being sugar. So I find myself when I hack Chinese American dishes, find myself adding a lot of sugar in order to like replicate that like flavor, which is actually not super common in Chinese food. Specifically, more commonly what you find is like things that are like of the sweetness, which is actually not the same as like sugar. So like with a lot of Chinese recipes, I find myself, or Chinese American recipes, I find myself literally adding sugar to recipes, which I have honestly never actually done in a like traditional Chinese dish. Usually, if I'm adding like sugar in a traditional Chinese dish, I usually be using something that is sweet. So like today we're going to be using Shaoxing Wine, black vinegar, and fish sauce. All three of those, they have a lot of sugar in them. So when you add them, they add sweetness, but they're not actually adding direct sugar. So it has sweetness, but it's like more of a complex sweetness that's like tells more of a story than just like straight up sugar. So today we are going to be adding a little bit of brown sugar. Let's see. Yeah, we're going to be adding a single tablespoon of brown sugar, which is, I think, down from the original Panda Express version that I had written. Uses, yeah, a quarter cup of brown sugar in the original version. So we're down. I think a quarter cup is 5 or 6 tablespoons. So we're down by like 5 tablespoons of sugar, and we're replacing that with a whole bunch of other stuff. So. Charles, yeah, I'm pretty sure we are. I have to get in touch with the gentleman who offered it, but I'm pretty sure we are. That's going to be super cool. I'm very stoked. That's stoked for that. What's up? Hope everyone's doing good and feeling happy. Yeah. Hope you're always doing good and feeling happy. Let's see. Next up. All right. Oh yeah. So what I just did, I just talked my way through all of the veggies. So what we just finished doing is chopping up all of our veggies. So very specifically, what I am using today is a single zucchini that was an entire orange bell pepper and then half of a sweet white onion. So those are the ones that I'm using today. I have on multiple occasions. So I think the original recipe, it actually calls for a stalk of celery. and the original Panda Express version. Oh, I think it actually uses a squash. So, but hopefully, I hope that the general ethos of like a Kung Pao chicken is that like you should use what you have. So the reason that I'm using the 3 veggies that I'm using today is because that's what was fresh at the market when I was buying them today. So that happens to be the ingredients that I'm using today. But when you assemble a Kung Pao chicken, it's really just about like understanding the nature of each of your vegetables. So what we know about the veggies that we're adding today is we're using zucchini, onion, and a bell pepper. So what I know about those 2 things is that the zucchini and the bell pepper is a lot more durable and hardy than the onion. So the way that we approach it is going to be a little bit different from how we would approach, say, if we were using like single onion and like just green onions or something, or like a really, really delicate vegetable. So the way that we're going to use it, we're going to add those zucchini and the bell pepper really, really early, and then we're going to add the onions really, really late. So that's in order to make sure that those onions don't fall apart in the wok fry. But yeah, hopefully, I hope if you're trying to reproduce this recipe that the general ethos is use what you have, use the veggies that are fresh. So if you can't find zucchini but you find yellow squash, those are pretty similar. If you can't find bell pepper, or if you can't find an orange bell pepper, use a red one. If you can't find bell pepper at all, you could replace it with celery. Celery is a super common substitute because it is like a nice filler ingredient. Yeah, use what you have available. Okay, next up, I'm assembling the sauce that is going to go into our wok fry. So very often, if you've ever watched like cooking videos from like restaurants and stuff, or street food, you will see a lot of wok chefs throwing this sauce directly into the stir fry. So they'll literally use a soup ladle and then ladle that sauce into the wok fry, which is first of all very hard to do because they're not measuring at all, they're eyeballing it, and 2 is you can mess that up real fast. if you eyeball it wrong, that is also probably why restaurant food is so salty and over seasoned, is because they're not measuring, they're just eyeballing. But the third and I think the most important thing to remember, that when they do that in a restaurant, the reason that they can do it is because they're cooking the same thing. They're literally cooking the exact same menu. Probably like some of those dishes they're cooking 20 or 30 times a day. So since they're making it so often, most of the time they're not even measuring because they make it so many times they don't really need to measure anymore. But for us in particular today, we do want to measure because I don't make this 20 or 30 times a day. So since I have not made this so many times that I can do it by feel, I want to measure. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure off heat, and then we're going to taste it, and then we can, since we're doing this off heat, we're going to have the opportunity to taste and adjust. So if we were doing it straight into the wok, you wouldn't really be able to taste until the very, very end, at which point it might even be too late because you can't really add much else. So let's see. For our sauce, this is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and a single tablespoon of sesame oil. And then next is going to be 2 tablespoons of fish sauce. Fish sauce, as the name implies, it comes from the fermentation of fish, which means that we get a lot of fishy umami qualities from it. That's like a lot of the sweetness is going to come from that 2 tablespoons of fish sauce. It is very, very pungent and very, very powerful. So I very infrequently recommend using more than a tablespoon or 2 of it. I think the only time that I use more than that is in a pad thai, in which fish sauce is like the most important ingredient in pad thai. Alright, that was also 2 tablespoons of black vinegar, which has quite a bit of sweetness in it too. And then we're going to finish off our sugar qualities with a single tablespoon of brown sugar. So I mentioned this earlier too, but the original Panda Express version that I had written, it uses 4 tablespoons. Or I think actually a 1/4 cup of sugar. So that's all of the sugar that we're adding now. So we have removed quite a bit of sugar now. Did I get the new mic? Not yet, but we're sorting that out though. I think it's sounding okay though. But also let me know if the mic is crapping out again. Thank you though. I appreciate all of the concern for the microphone. Hermina, do I prefer chicken thighs over chicken breasts? Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. I have a lot of different opinions about chicken thigh versus chicken breast. What I have noticed in like the process of hacking so many Chinese American dishes, especially things like Panda Express and PF Chang's recipes, is that those restaurants, they very, very frequently use chicken breast. I have very infrequently ever seen one of those restaurants use chicken thigh. I think that the reason, I always assumed that there was some sort of food science reason why they were using chicken breast. And I think like my one guess is that if you're deep frying chicken, you can get a little bit more crispy of a piece of chicken from a chicken breast because it has less fat and less moisture in it. So since there's less moisture in that piece of chicken, when you deep fry it, the fryer oil doesn't have to do as much work to dry the chicken out. So the fryer oil is always going to dry the chicken out. But if it has to do less work, then it will get to sear more quickly. So hypothetically, if you're using chicken breast in a deep fry, you can get a crispier piece of chicken. I don't actually think that's why they do it, because I have A/B tested this like dozens of times. I have A/B tested this more times than I can count now, and what I've discovered is it tastes the same. There's no difference. They're exactly the same. The only time that it really makes a difference is like today, because we're not actually deep frying. We're just going to be stir frying, and I actually think that chicken thigh is really important right now because we need that extra fat in order for it to work. The reason that I think those restaurants use chicken breast instead of chicken thigh is because I think it's like a marketing ploy. I think they're doing that in order to trick people into thinking or believing that like the thing that they're serving is healthy. So they call it like chicken breasts in order to make people like put people in that mindset that it's healthy because hypothetically chicken breast has less fat than chicken thigh. So people think that it's healthier, which is nonsense. But definitely for today's particular stir fry, I think it's going to be really, really important because it is going to be where all of the fat from our meat comes from. So we're going to need that extra fat because we're not deep frying. So I think it's going to be really, really important. All right, so next up to our sauce, I'm adding, this is 2 tablespoons of black bean paste that was going to be in the title. So it is probably maybe the most important ingredient to our sauce today. And is that it? Yeah, that's it for our sauce. All right, and then the most important thing to do when you're assembling the sauce off heat is taste it. What does it taste like? Does it need something? Add if it needs something. Yeah, mine needs a little bit of salt. It almost always needs a little bit more salt. So I'm going to add a little bit more salt. And actually, I think mine needs a little bit more soy sauce. So I'm going to add a little soy sauce. Yeah, that's better. So we're setting this aside, and this is going to go in our wok at the very end once we're done searing everything. Kikkoman soy sauce. Yeah, actually, so what I'm using today is low sodium. I'm pretty sure it's Kikkoman. Yeah, we're using Kikkoman today. I don't really pay a huge amount of attention to the brand of soy sauce that I use, but I do pay attention. I almost always, whenever I'm using soy sauce for cooking, I like using low sodium soy sauce because I think that you can use more of it. So since it has less salt in it, that means that the soy sauce is less concentrated. So I don't use low sodium soy sauce because it's healthier, although I guess maybe technically it is healthier. I like using it because you can use more of it, so it's not as concentrated, so you can be more heavy-handed with that soy sauce without over-seasoning. So generally, anytime that I'm using soy sauce, unless I'm using dark soy sauce, I'm probably using low sodium. Yeah, it's probably the most important ingredient to a pad thai is tamarind. I would say the second most important is fish sauce, and I think that's because a pad thai is so fishy. Like the fishy qualities of pad thai, that's the thing that we associate with it. So the color, I think that in a pad thai, the thing that we associate with the color comes from tamarind paste, and definitely, certainly a lot of flavor. But the quintessential flavor that you're thinking of or you're getting when you eat a pad thai, I think it's actually coming from that fish sauce. So in my opinion, I think that fish sauce is the most iconic flavor that you're tasting when you eat a pad thai, which is why actually I've seen lots of people, which I don't recommend doing, but I've seen a lot of people doing pad thai with ketchup, which sounds really gross, but To each their own. Do I put MSG? Oh yeah. Good question. Do I put MSG? Ooh, I didn't cut any of this through. Do I put MSG for umami? So very often, occasionally I use MSG. The only time that I actually use MSG is when I haven't used a very heavy sauce base. So I think the one time that I have used MSG in recent memory was when I did the mushu pork, which had a really simple sauce. And I used a tiny bit of MSG to kind of push that layer of umami a little bit more forward. But otherwise, I very frequently leave MSG out, not because I think it's unhealthy or anything. I leave it out because a lot of the things that we're using in our sauce, it contains quite a bit of MSG already. So what we're using today, there's definitely MSG in our soy sauce. There's definitely a lot of MSG in our black bean paste. There's quite a bit of MSG in hoisin sauce, which we're going to use on our marinade. And then I think the number one source of MSG that we're going to get from is going to be in our white pepper, which I think I didn't know this for quite a while, actually. But white pepper has a lot of MSG in it. All of that, it's like an additive that goes into white pepper. So we're going to be using that in our marinade today. And that's actually going to be a huge source of MSG. But I very infrequently will I use directly add MSG to a recipe, unless it really needs something extra. In which case, if it needs that much extra, they probably didn't season it enough. Yeah, good question. What is MSG? So MSG, it stands for monosodium glutamate. It is originally, I actually learned this recently, MSG is originally derived from the, I think it just comes from dried kelp. And it is sort of like the source, the umami flavor that a lot of people associate with Chinese food. So it's that very, it's savory but also salty. It's like the iconic quintessential flavor of umami. So when you're thinking of umami, it comes from MSG. It is originally and organically derived from kelp, so it's like a seaweed umami. These days, it's not. I don't think people make it from kelp anymore. I think it's artificially created now. And you can, if you're really looking for it, you can buy it by probably the popular one is made by Ajinomoto. And it comes in a package, so it kind of just looks like salt. So you can add it in pinches, and you can sprinkle a little bit on. It works really great in marinades because it's such a fine powder that it works into marinades really well. There's an ongoing debate about whether or not MSG is healthy for you, or if it's bad for you, or if you should not use it. I don't have a problem with it. I don't find that MSG is necessarily too so unhealthy for you that you shouldn't cook with it. I do think that you can't make Chinese food without MSG. I think it's a extremely important flavor of Chinese food. So I don't think that you can do Chinese food without MSG. I think if you're not adding MSG to Chinese food, then you're probably not using the right ingredients. But I also don't think that you need to go out of your way to independently add MSG to a recipe, because a lot of the seasonings that we're going to be adding, they all contain MSG already. So it's not necessary to add much of it independently. Madison Square Garden, yeah. Oh, I can actually read that. I'm getting better at Chinese. 你是香港人? Yeah, no, so I'm Chinese, Taiwanese, not from Hong Kong though. Good question. I can't believe I just read that. That was awesome. I've been learning Chinese for a while, so, but really slowly. So, my Chinese is kind of poor. Let's see. Okay, so next up, so this is our chicken thigh. We've just diced them into about an inch piece or so. We want to be specifically careful to make sure that these are all similar sizes, because we want to make sure that it cooks evenly. So if you chop your chicken unevenly, it will also cook unevenly. So that's super important. This is actually true for really anything that you chop. You want to make sure that everything is chopped evenly, because if you chop unevenly, it will also cook unevenly. Alright, so for our marinade, we're going to add a couple of things. We're starting off, this is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce to start. followed by 2 tablespoons of hoisin sauce. Hoisin sauce, it has a lot of sugar in it, so use this stuff really, really sparingly, especially if you're trying to steer clear of like Chinese American flavors, because it has quite a bit of sugar in it. So it will definitely make your dish sweeter than you want if you use too much of it. I kind of think of it as like the ketchup of Chinese food. And when I was a kid, I actually used to use it like it was ketchup. I used to add it, like squeeze it on top of stuff. Next up, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of Shaoxing Wine, which is Chinese cooking wine. Shaoxing Wine, it's kind of like, it is the Chinese version of dry cooking sherry, which means that it is very sweet. So just like our hoisin sauce, there's a lot of sweetness that's going to come from there. And then the last thing. Oh yeah, well, not quite the last thing, but what next up is a teaspoon. I have like maybe a 1/4 teaspoon of cornstarch. Just a really tiny amount of cornstarch. I love doing that with meats, and I think that you'll frequently see that come up in a lot of meat marinades with Chinese wok cooking, because what it is going to do is it's going to shield our wok fry, or shield our meats from overcooking and keep it from turning rubbery. So you will frequently see that come up in a lot of meats, because it is how you prevent the really, really aggressive wok heat from overcooking the meat so quickly. So we just need, we also want to be careful not to add too much of it, because you also want to remember that cornstarch is the same thing that we're going to be using in our sauce to sort of thicken things up and kind of like create a cohesive sauce, which means that if you use too much cornstarch in your meat, it will start turning gloopy. So we really, when I say a 1/4 teaspoon, I really mean a 1/4 teaspoon. Don't use any more than that. I would even say maybe even a little bit less than that, because it will start turning gloopy real quick. Alright, so that's it for our marinade. I also added a tiny pinch of white pepper. That was maybe 1/2 teaspoon of white pepper. And that's also, by the way, where our source of MSG is going to come from. And that is going to sit in our marinade for a little while. If you're really committed, that should go for at least 30 minutes. Ours is probably not going to go for 30 minutes, maybe like 10 minutes. Such is the struggle with marinades, though. Alright, a couple more things before we're ready to start cooking. I guess I should start preheating the wok though. First up, I'm going to crush up, this is going to be some Szechuan Peppercorn. Szechuan Peppercorn is the pepper or heat that you associate with Szechuan food. If you've never had Szechuan food before, or if you're not familiar, Szechuan food has a quality about it that makes it very spicy, but a very specific kind of spice, in which we colloquially refer to it as a numbing sensation. So the numbing foods or numbing spices, that all comes from Szechuan peppercorn, which is why the Szechuan peppercorn is easily the most important ingredient to any Szechuan dish, because it is what makes it it's what creates that heat, or that specific kind of heat. What I have found very, very often, pretty much in every Chinese American recipe that I've ever hacked, is that this is never used. Very often they leave this out and they replace it with red pepper flake, which I think is coming from directly coming from the thing that I believe is happening all the time with Chinese American foods, is that they're adjusting Chinese American food to fit the American palate, and the spice that is most accustomed to the American palate is red chili flake. So very often they'll remove this Szechuan peppercorn and replace it with red chili flake, which is like more of a, if you've ever had red chili flake, it's the thing that you add on top of pizza. It's also really common in Italian food, and it's like a very, very straightforward, like very, very normal kind of heat. It's also like not complex in any way. It's really just a straight ahead layer of heat, which is okay in some cases, and I actually use red chili flake all the time. But the Szechuan peppercorn, it's going to give us a much more complex layer of heat than that red chili flake. So. All right. You made black bean garlic ribs. Oh, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Oh, after watching the stream. Cool. Yeah, yeah. ATL bets. Yeah, so yesterday we made a dajiangmian, which uses black bean paste. And it's like black bean paste is what we're using today in order to create the black bean, spicy black bean kung pao chicken. And that is going to be a huge source of like the interesting qualities of umami that we're getting today. And is one of my favorite things to add to the stir fries of late. All right, last up, the very last thing that I'm going to put together, and also the very last thing that I'm going to add to my stir fry, is a cornstarch slurry. So if you have ever followed one of these streams before, there is a cornstarch slurry in almost every Chinese dish that I ever do, at least the ones that are saucy, because the cornstarch slurry is what creates thick sauces. So I equate it to, I say this a lot now, but I equate it to the use of pasta water in in Italian food, in which we cook the pasta and then reserve some of the water from that cooked pasta because that water contains a whole bunch of starch that has shed off from the pasta water. And then you use that pasta water to create thick sauces. So it's a really, really important quality to things like carbonaras, bolognese, ragouts, lasagna even, because a lasagna contains a bolognese. All of those, they contain a whole bunch of pasta water because that pasta water has a whole bunch of starch in it, and it's how you make a thick sauce. Without it, you won't have a thick sauce. It will just be a watery and kind of a loose sauce. So in Chinese food, we do a very similar thing, but it's not pasta water, we use cornstarch. And this cornstarch is going to be the last thing that we add to our kung pao chicken right before we finish serving it. Right before we serve it, and it's going to kind of tighten the whole thing up and create a more luxurious and thick sauce. Up until that point, you'll notice that our wok fry is going to be pretty loose and kind of watery, and that is the texture that we want to look for, because we don't want it to be too tight, otherwise it's not going to tighten up properly. All right. The last thing that I'm going to set aside, we don't actually need to do anything, I just want to set these aside, this is going to be about a quarter cup of, well, maybe, yeah, that's good. About a quarter cup of, this is honey roasted peanuts. I used to go back and forth on using honey roasted. I also used to use raw peanuts, but I have discovered that honey roasted peanuts in a wok fry really, really good, because the honey roasted coating on the peanut, it does quite a bit of work in keeping that peanut crunchy. So a couple folks have asked me about like using peanuts in a stir fry and how to keep them from going super, super soggy. So like that is very often the quality that you associate with a peanut in a stir fry, or just generally a cooked peanut, is that it's like kind of soggy, like kind of a little bit mushy. So I think like the number one thing that you need to do in order to make sure that a peanut is not mushy is first you need to wok fry it correctly. So it needs to be flash cooked in hot oil, so it needs to be one of the first things that you put in. But what I've discovered is that a really great way to make sure that those peanuts are not mushy is use a honey roasted peanut instead, and it has this nice crystallized structure that is covered around it, which makes it a really, really tasty snack. The same reason that we use peanuts, or that we like to eat peanuts as a snack, or honey roasted peanuts as a snack, because it's coated in sugar. It works really great in a wok fry too. Where did cornstarch come before corn? I'm not sure. Where did starch come before corn? Well, I mean, there's starch is derived from a lot of different places. In just Chinese food alone, I have definitely, in lieu of cornstarch, have used potato starch very often. You can use rice flour for a similar purpose. All of those are like similar starches. I found that cornstarch seems to work the best because all of the other ones you need to use a lot more of it. But all of them behave in a very similar way. I would say cornstarch might be the only one that's gluten-free. That might not be true. Yeah, but like when you're in a Chinese market, next time look around and you'll see when you're looking at the cornstarch, next to it will be a whole bunch of other things. So like rice flour, tapioca flour I've seen quite a bit. Definitely potato starch, all of those things, they're used for the same purpose. The same reason why Chinese people are buying it is because they use it to thicken up sauces. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so what we have here are peanuts, and over here are some Tianjin peppers. These might not be Tianjin, but they are a dry kind of pepper. in Chinese food, probably the most common one is a Tianjin pepper, which is essentially a dry pepper, and we're going to throw these into early in our wok fry. When they hit that hot oil, it's going to release a bunch of capsaicin, and that's going to give us a nice, interesting bit of heat. If you're using Tianjin peppers, you want to also remember this stuff is not edible, so don't try and eat these things because they won't taste like anything and will probably be kind of gross. Which also means that when you use them, you want to use them sparingly, because if you use them too much, then you're going to have a bunch of inedible peppers all over your stir fry, which is not attractive. All right, let's head over to the stove. So, over on the stove, I have my wok. It's been heating up for about 5 minutes now. We want this thing as hot as a wok can possibly get before you start cooking, because you want as much heat as possible. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a mushy stir fry. So anytime that you're wok cooking, make sure that thing is as hot as you can get it, because it's going to start shedding heat as soon as you start putting stuff in. So when you first start cooking, it might seem like the wok is too hot or like scary hot because it might start spinning a little bit. That's okay. It's not a big problem. You're not doing anything wrong. But as soon as you start putting more stuff in, so once stuff starts entering that wok, the temperature of that wok is going to start rapidly declining. So you want to start paying attention and listen. So use your ear. When you start hearing sizzling, that means that you have lots of nice heat. When you stop hearing sizzling, that means that you don't have as much heat anymore. So when the wok gets really, really quiet, that means that you're probably like not getting a lot of heat. So it might even get to the point where your wok is basically simmering if it has too much stuff in it. All of those are bad things if you're still cooking, because low heat in a wok is our biggest enemy. So the more heat loss that you have, the more that you're driving towards developing kind of like an oatmeal texture to your wok, or like oatmeal, or just generally like goopy stir fry. That's what we very, very frequently associate when if you've ever had a stir fry that's like really, really mushy. That's what's happening, is it was cooked over low heat, which is not ever attractive. That's a real bad sign. And I have cooked plenty of my share of stir fries that look like that. So we're going to do a couple of things to make sure that that doesn't happen to us today. The number one thing that people very frequently say about wok frying is that you can't do it on a home range because you don't have enough heat potential on a home range. That's actually not true. You can absolutely do wok cooking on a home range, but we need to navigate the heat a little bit differently. So in a restaurant, very often you will see that those restaurants, they have these burners. They literally look like jet engines, and those burners, they get way, way hotter than anything else that you've ever cooked on. Since we don't have that, we have to employ a technique that we call batch cooking, which is essentially cooking some elements and then we're going to remove it and then cook our next element. And since that wok is empty when we cook this second element, we're going to have a lot more heat, as opposed to if we were to just cook one thing and then continue to add. With each progressive element that we add, that heat temperature is going to start dropping more and more and more. So by using batch cooking, we're going to make sure that everything cooks on nice hot heat. Yeah, totally. That explains your Krabby stir fry. That explains a lot of stir fries that I've ever done. Batch cooking, it's also a really tricky one too, because you have to pay attention. And a lot of times I have definitely tried to get away without doing batch cooking because it's annoying, because you have to keep pulling stuff out. Sometimes I've made a judgment call and then it was a wrong judgment call, and then I ended up getting a mushy stir fry. So it takes a lot of experience to work around batch cooking. Cool. My wok is almost at temperature. I think I'm looking for a little bit more smoke here. In the meantime, hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here streaming every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. PST. Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST, and there's new recipes that are coming out over on the YouTube channel every Friday. So tomorrow is Friday, which means that we're releasing the recipe video for marble tea eggs, which is going to be one of my favorites. The recipe that we're doing today is for a Kung Pao chicken recipe that I had written as a part of a hack series that I've been doing on the YouTube channel, in which we've been hacking a lot of Chinese American classics. So today we're doing the Kung Pao chicken. That series, it contains a whole bunch of other different foods though. We've done the honey sesame chicken, that one's probably my favorite. General Tso's chicken, Kung Pao chicken. We did the Panda Express from the Beijing beef from Panda Express. We've done a couple of things from P.F. Chang's. Coming up soon, I think coming up next Friday is the Mongolian beef from P.F. Chang's. And all of those are really interesting because essentially what we're doing is deconstructing Chinese American food and kind of taking a look at what are the things that make Chinese American food so American, Very often for me that ends up being things like sugar or sauce. So like Chinese food that is very, very sauce heavy. That's like a quality about American food that Americans love. So what I like doing in that series is essentially we'll deconstruct some of those Chinese American classics and remove those American qualities and then replace them with a bunch of stuff that comes from traditional Chinese cooking. So today we're doing a Panda Express recipe that originally had a whole quarter cup of sugar in it, had a quarter cup of brown sugar in it. And I have removed that and I'm replacing it with a couple of things. So namely we're doing some hoisin sauce, fish sauce, black vinegar, and Shaoxing wine, all of which have sugar in it, and that's going to be where our source of sweetness comes from. And then what you get at the end of that is like a more complex and interesting layer of like flavor that is like, it's very interesting because what we're essentially doing is reconstructing an American classic in the lens of traditional Chinese cooking. And then I think the number one thing that's going to stand out today is the black bean paste, which you normally don't find in a stir fry. Normally that comes up in noodle dishes, so that's going to be really, really interesting. Have I done dan dan noodles? Yeah, I have, and that recipe, the recipe is over on YouTube, and we're actually streaming that. I think that's going to be streaming next Thursday, Tuesday or Thursday. If someone's on the YouTube channel, you could look it up. The schedule is over on YouTube, so you can find out over on YouTube, and someone can tell me. But I'm pretty sure we're streaming that next week, and the recipe video is over on YouTube too. So, if you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel and check out what's going on over there. Lots of fun stuff going on, including the recipe for this particular dish. In addition to all of the recipes, that's also where the concurrent live stream lives, which is the laptop behind me. That laptop streams to YouTube. On the YouTube channel, there's a whole schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking, like I just mentioned. So if you're trying to find out what I'm going to be cooking next, you can find that over on YouTube and look up what's coming up. Lots of people have started looking that stuff up. There's also a ingredient list, so if you want, you can find out what I'm going to be cooking, pick up the ingredients, and you can cook stuff with me, which is super, super fun. I got a new subscription. Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for subscribing. We're working our way to 2,300 subscribers by the end of the month, so if you want to help us hit that subscriber goal, hop over and check it out. But only subscribe if you're interested. Don't subscribe if you're not interested, because I don't like spamming people. All right, so our wok is super hot right now. It's getting there. What we're looking for in our wok is we're looking for a lot of smoke. So if you don't have smoke in your wok, that means that it's not hot enough yet. So we have a little bit of smoke. You can see it is starting to smoke a little bit. We need a lot more smoke than that. We want to make sure that that thing is real, real hot before we start cooking, though. Otherwise, we will get a mushy stir fry. The other quality about woks to remember, though, is that they are very, very thin, which means their temperature changes very, very quickly. So just like the way that it heats up pretty quickly, it also cools down very quickly. So I just turned on the high heat, and you'll notice that there's a whole bunch of smoke billowing off of it right now. So we're getting there. This will probably come up to temperature in maybe 15 seconds. That also means that it cools down very quickly too, though. So you keep that in mind every time that you're wok cooking. Just like how it heats up really quickly, it also cools down really quickly. So pay attention and keep a close eye on how hot your wok is. If you notice that it is not very hot anymore, stop what you're doing. It's a real simple solution. If you notice that your wok isn't hot enough, just stop agitating it, stop moving it around, and it will build up more heat just by the simple fact that you have stopped moving it. Motion is what causes a wok to cool. Is another part of what causes a wok to cool down. It's not the only part, but it is one of the big ones. All right, so I'm adding today. We're using peanut oil. I'm giving that a swirl. In Chinese cooking, we call that a long yao, which is the process of adding cold oil to a hot wok. And then I'm following that up with our aromatics. So this is garlic, ginger, and the whites of my green onions. And then we're going to let this go long enough until it becomes fragrance. So use your nose here. When you start smelling garlic and ginger, that's when you know you're ready to move on. Usually for me, that's about 10 to 15 seconds. But use your nose. Pay attention. What does it smell like? All right, that's good. Then I'm going to add my chicken next, but you'll notice that I'm going to be very careful and I'm not adding the liquid elements of my marinade here. That's very specifically because we want to reduce the amount of liquid that enters our wok. The more liquid that's in a wok, the faster that it will cool down. So in an effort to make sure that our wok doesn't lose heat too quickly, we're reducing all of this liquid. So there's a whole bunch of liquid in my marinade that we're not adding. That's so that we don't lose heat. All right. Isn't the smoke burning oil? Yes. So if you have oil in a wok and it's smoking, okay, that's a good point I should point out. What I mean is when a wok is empty and it starts smoking, that's a sign that you have a lot of heat. If you have oil in the wok and it starts smoking, that's a sign that your oil is burning. So that's not what we're looking for. That's a good point. Thank you for pointing that out. I'll clarify. So when we're heating a wok, though, when it's empty and we're heating it up, that's when we're looking for smoke. Once oil is in the wok, you probably want to start cooking as soon as you put that oil in the wok. If you leave it in a hot wok for too long, it will start burning, and that depends on the smoke point of your oil. So if you've ever worked with olive oil before, olive oil burns really, really quickly, and you can taste it. Once the oil starts burning, you can taste it. So you want to avoid oil. You want to avoid the point where oil starts smoking for sure. All right, I'm going to let this chicken go for maybe another 2 minutes, maybe a little less than that even. Yeah. Cast iron. Yeah, so before I owned a wok, I used to cook in a cast iron skillet with stir fries all the time. It works just as well. I'd say like the biggest problem that I used to come across with a cast iron skillet is that it's a lot harder to toss because it's so heavy and it's not the right shape for a wok toss. So you can't do stuff like this because it's really heavy. A cast iron skillet probably weighs like 20-25 pounds. So you can't do wok tosses. But the other thing I'll recommend, so I know someone else just mentioned a cast iron wok. So if you're cooking on like an induction top or an electric range, I would say that a cast iron wok is probably the best solution to that because cast iron has such a high heat potential or heat retention, so that when you use cast iron in the heat on an induction top, you don't have to worry about whether or not that cast iron pan is going to cool down. So that helps navigate the heat of an electric range. All right, so I'm pulling my chicken out of the wok, and then we're going to rinse down our wok. We're removing everything, and then essentially what we're doing is just restarting. So we're rinsing everything down. I'm going to dry everything off, and then we're going to move on to our next ingredient. So the biggest thing that we have to pay attention to when you're batch cooking, I know this is the number one thing that's kind of a bummer when you're batch cooking, is essentially what we just did when we cleaned out our wok right now, is we just rinsed out a bunch of flavors. So the things that were in the wok when we rinsed it out were a bunch of soy sauce, there was a bunch of chicken fat that probably was left behind, probably some aromatic elements too. All of that is stuff that you just rinsed out, and that's not stuff that you necessarily want to be losing. But in a batch cooking process, it's super, super important to rinse that stuff out, because if you leave it in the wok, it will start burning and then you'll have burnt things. So that, in my opinion, is probably the number one biggest trade-off with batch cooking, is that you have to rinse out a lot of flavor. I think it is generally still okay because you're still saving a lot of the stuff in our original fry. So over on the cutting board, we can take a look at our finished chicken, and it is very, very saucy. So we have lots of sauce going on. That's all coming from the chicken fat. And that's going to be where all of our flavor comes from. So we can say, we can mourn the loss of the flavor that we just rinsed down the sink, but it will be okay. Have I ever come across an induction burner strictly for wok? Ooh, I have not. That is a good question. I have not found one. I'd say the number one problem that I have with induction burners, I'm going to turn down the heat while I answer. The number one problem that I have with induction burners is that in induction tops, or like really any electric range, it has an auto shut-off at one point. So at some point, what happens in an electric range is that it heats up, the coil will heat up, or the electric top will heat up, when it hits a certain temperature, it'll shut off, and then it will turn back on when it hits another temperature, so a certain low point. So it has a high point ceiling and a low point ceiling. Once it hits that high ceiling, it turns off until it hits a certain low ceiling, and then it will turn back on again. That, and I think generally with induction burners, is not an adjustable setting. That's part of how the induction top works. So since it has that auto shut off, that in most cases with most frying pans is not that big of a deal, because it's a very, very short intermittent amount of time in which that burner shuts off, probably like less than 10 seconds. But in a wok cook, if your fire turns off for 10 seconds, that's a big problem because all of the heat is going to disappear from your wok. And 10 seconds is enough, definitely enough time to lose heat in a wok cook. So if you're looking for an induction burner that's made for woks, what we're looking for is an induction burner that doesn't shut off. As long as it doesn't shut off, and as long as you have that consistent heat or constant heat, then you'll be able to wok cook on it. But I have never seen an induction top that does that, in my experience so far. If one exists, that's exactly what you need. Oh, they have a divot in them. Yeah, I've heard of. I forget what those. People don't refer to them as induction burners. They have like a divot in them. I've seen them in restaurants where it's like, kind of looks like a sink. Some of them are built over sinks, so you can the round bottom wok will fit into the induction burner, and then you can cook in the chefs seem to be using them just fine. I've never used one, but allegedly they work really great. Subscribe. Oh, cool. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So cast iron wok. So my cast iron pan is like a 10-inch cast iron, and I think that thing weighs like 20, maybe 25 pounds. So I used to own a cast iron skillet. I don't remember how heavy it was, but it was probably like close to 40 pounds. I think it was really, really heavy, which means that you're definitely not going to be able to do any wok tossing. But I think probably the best solution to wok cooking on an induction burner. All right, back over to the stove. We're reheating our wok, and then we're going to cook the second half, which will be all of our veggies. Cool, yeah. Hello to everyone on Reddit. If you haven't checked it out yet, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel. I know I've seen a couple people who have popped over already. But if you haven't checked it out and you're interested in what's going on over on YouTube, that would be the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. We have a second stream that's going on behind me. That's over on YouTube. In addition to the concurrent live stream, that's also where all of the recipe videos live. So if you're looking for how to cook the things that I'm cooking, that all lives over on YouTube. This particular stream, it's part of a larger series that we've been doing on Chinese American hacks. So if you're trying to find out how to replicate P.F. Chang's and Panda Express recipes, that's all over on YouTube. The version that we're doing today is actually not the Panda Express version. It's the alternate version that I had written that is inspired by Panda Express, but it's removing a whole bunch of flavors that come from the Panda Express version and replacing them with ingredients that come from traditional Chinese cooking. Cool. Right, so next up we're going to move on to our veggies here. So I'm going to do the same thing I did earlier. So we're reheating our wok as hot as it will get. And we're adding a little bit of cooking oil. I don't need to add too much oil here because remember that we're going to be introducing quite a bit of fat when we put that chicken back in. We just need enough in order to cook our veggies. So I'd say that was like maybe 2.5 tablespoons of oil here. And then first up, I'm adding my Tianjin peppers. We want to add these first because the heat from the oil is going to release that capsaicin. That also means that you want your windows to be open when you add these things in. Otherwise, they're going to start smoking up and you're going to have a real bad cough. Next up, I'm following that with my zucchini. And I'm just giving my zucchini a little bit of a head start because it is a very, very durable veggie. We're going to give that maybe 1 minute of a head start. Zapfish, yeah, looks good. Yeah, thanks for tuning in again. Good to see so many people coming back all the time. All right, that's looking good. Next up, I'm going to follow that up with our bell peppers. You'll notice the one thing that I'm holding back on right now are our onions. So the last thing that we have not yet introduced here is our onions. That is very specifically important because onions are pretty delicate. So we don't want to add those things in too early, otherwise it will basically just come apart and you won't have onions anymore. You'll just have like disintegrated onions. So we don't want to add those in too early. All right, so you could kind of hear there. You'll notice that there is a lot of stuff in my wok right now, so you could use your ears, and I think you could probably hear it on the mics. But if you listen, there's not quite as much sizzling happening in the wok right now. That's okay because we're pretty close to being done. But if you notice that happening and you're still cooking, so like we are right now, there's one very simple solution, and it is best essentially just stop moving the wok. So just leave it sit and let it sit for a little bit, and some of that heat is going to return. Just from the simple artifact of just stop moving it and it will heat up again. Yeah, that's good. All right, next up are going to be our peanuts. I also want to make sure that our peanuts hit some oil at the bottom, so I'm going to give this a little bit of space. And now I'm finally adding my onions. We're going to let this go. What kind of wok do I use? Yeah, so it's a carbon steel wok. I actually don't think that it has a brand. I picked mine up at a restaurant supply store. So if you're in Oakland or if you're near Oakland, I got mine from Chenko, which is like somewhere in Chinatown. If you don't live in Oakland, most Chinatowns they have a restaurant supply store somewhere nearby because that restaurant supply store is the restaurant supply store that's supplying for all of the restaurants that are in the area. So generally, if you live near a Chinatown, you should be able to find a similar store where you can find a wok like this. If you don't live near anything like that, you can also find, I've heard real good reviews about the Joyce Chen carbon steel wok. I think they have a flat bottom one that's really popular. I have not ever owned one. I've used my friend's Joyce Chen carbon steel, and I've had a lot of good experience with it. But I think that the number one most important thing about a wok is it doesn't have too much to do about the brand. It has more to do about how you season it. So what makes a wok non-stick, or what makes a carbon steel wok at least non-stick, comes from use. So it comes from seasoning. All right, so that's looking good. Next up, I'm adding my chicken back to the wok, and you'll notice that as soon as I add that chicken back, we're gonna lose all of our heat. That's okay because we're done cooking. So at this point, it's okay if we lose heat here because we don't have anything else to cook. So we're at the point where everything that's going to go into the wok has already cooked. So everything is already cooked. So when we lose heat, it won't turn mushy because we've already finished cooking. All right. And then finally, I'm following this up with our sauce. I have gotten in the habit of reserving the last, this is like maybe the last quarter cup, maybe a little less than a quarter cup of the sauce mixture. That's to make sure that we don't over season. So what I like to do is reserve that last quarter cup or so and then give everything a toss. And then if we need it, then we can add that last remainder. But if you don't need it, don't use it. Ours happens to need it. So I'm gonna add it. Frozen veggies, yeah, you could totally use a frozen veggie in a wok fry. I love using frozen veggies in particular in fried rices because what happens with a frozen veggie is that it defrosts in the wok heat. So very, very useful in a wok stir fry because once it defrosts, it will be nice and crunchy. Whereas like if you were using say like a canned veggie, so if you used canned carrots instead of a frozen carrot, it will turn mushy because it's already mushy in the can. But I use frozen veggies all the time. I love using frozen peas and corn in a lot of fried rices because for the specific reason that they stay pretty crispy because they defrost in the wok. Yeah, all right. All right, so I just added my cornstarch slurry, and then we're letting everything come together a little bit more, and that should do it. You'll notice that as soon as I added that cornstarch, our sauce came together very, very quickly. So you'll notice that the sauce is now a lot thicker and more luxurious. That's what we're looking for. I'm going to add a tiny little bit of water because this is coming together a little bit more quickly than I'd like. So that's maybe like, that was less than a quarter cup even. That ought to do it. Yeah, that's good. So we have two garnishes that we have not yet added. We're going to do that off heat. All right, so I'm setting that aside. The last thing that we want to do anytime that we're cooking in a wok is clean it. So for wok care is that you want to clean that wok while it's still hot. That's super, super frustrating, I know, because there's a bunch of food for you to eat sitting in front of you, and you just want to eat that food. But really, really important is that while the wok is still hot, it is also still non-stick. So when it cools down, it won't be quite as non-stick anymore. So if we were to, say for example, remove everything from the wok and then start eating, and then come back to the wok maybe 45 minutes later when you're done eating, what you will find is that everything that was left behind in the wok has now started sticking to the wok. And that's when you get into the scenario where you start having to scrub stuff. Now you have to get like brushes out, sponges come out, steel wool might come into play. All of those are things that we don't want to be using in a wok if you can help it. Because that's how you start scrubbing seasoning off, which is not real good. So what we want to do instead is clean it while it's hot. So all I did right now was just give it a rinse and everything came right off because we have a real nice non-stick surface. And then we're going to season it the same way that you would do with a cast iron pan. I'm adding just a tiny little bit of oil. And then we're spreading that around the wok. And we want to coat the entire surface, so not just the cooking surface. You also have to do the back and bottom, anywhere that is contacted with heat. So I'm doing the bottom, and our goal here is to make sure that we don't let the carbon steel oxidize. That's how you get carbon steel to rust. Oh yeah, the name of the music. So lots of people have been asking about the name of the music. So I also write beats, which is under the sister channel, which is called Woo Cooks Beats. I will link that. Yeah, so lots of people ask about this. So I used to play music for a living with a band called Trace Repeat. During COVID, I started this YouTube channel because there's no live music and I don't have anything else to do. During the COVID times, I've been writing music solo, and that's under a sister channel which is called Woo Cooks Beats. I think it has like 50 subscribers. It's like real brand new. But that's where all of the beats live. So anything that plays under a voiceover, anything that's happening. If you hear any music that's associated with this channel, it's probably under the Woo Cooks Beats channel. So I do a lot of like remixes. This is what you're listening to right now is a remix of the Portugal the Man song called Feel It Still. That just came out on Spotify too. Oh, a Foster the People cover, that would be fun. I'll probably do that. That sounds real cool. So yeah, that all lives over on that YouTube channel. It's on Spotify right now, and yeah, lots of fun stuff living over there. That's also, you can look up the website for this. There's a brand new website that I just launched. It's called woocancook.com. And that's where a whole bunch of music also lives over there. There's a lot of information over there. You can also find a lot of the written recipes too. So, if you're looking for that stuff, that all lives over there. There it is. Cool. Yeah. Very interesting. New sub. Oh, cool. Yeah. Thank you everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. PST, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST, and new recipes coming out every Friday, usually like Friday mornings. So if you're looking for those recipes, that all lives over on the YouTube channel, which is the, if you're watching on Reddit, that would be the YouTube channel that's at the bottom of the screen, so that's down there. That's youtube.com/woocancook. If you haven't checked that out yet, if you're watching on Reddit and you haven't checked that stuff out yet, I highly recommend checking it out. There's a lot of fun content going on over there. We do a lot of polls, and like people like oftentimes will help me figure out what I'm going to be cooking next. I know I just got a new request for a beef chow fun, which I'm super stoked for, because I have never made beef chow fun before, so that's going to be really interesting. So if you're interested in finding out what's going on over on the YouTube channel, I recommend hopping over. We're working our way to 2,300 subscribers by the end of February, so if you want to help us hit that goal, hop over and check out what's going on over there. You've been listening, very nice. Oh, cool, yeah, totally. Hermina, yeah, thank you for checking out the music too. In addition to all of the concurrent live streams, so behind me you'll notice there's another laptop that's ticking along. That concurrent live stream, it lives over on YouTube. On that stream, there's a whole schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking, so not just the one that's happening right now, but there's a schedule of everything that's going to be happening probably over the next like 3 weeks or so. So if you want to find out what's going to be coming up next, you can find that over on that YouTube channel too. In addition to that concurrent live stream, there's also a whole bunch of recipe videos. So everything that I cook on stream, it has a recipe video that goes along with it. This particular stream is using a recipe video that I had written that's part of a larger series dedicated to reproducing foods from Chinese American classics. So this particular one comes from Panda Express. We've done a whole bunch of stuff from Panda Express. Also a couple of things from PF Chang's, which has been really fun. In that series, essentially what we're doing is deconstructing Chinese American food and then removing a lot of American quality, or like at least starting by identifying what the American qualities are and then removing those things and then replacing them with things that come from traditional Chinese cooking. So kind of using an understanding of how traditional Chinese cooking works to take a look at, or like to see what Chinese American food would look like if it were cooked in a traditional Chinese way. So kung pao chicken, it's actually basically just a veggie stir fry. So it's actually a pretty easy one to make look traditional because it actually has a lot of origins from traditional Chinese cooking. But some of those things that we're doing, so like the honey sesame chicken or General Tso's chicken, a lot of those things, they don't really come from Chinese cooking anymore. They're pretty much just American food. Kung pao, or honey sesame chicken, is basically just American popcorn chicken with a honey glaze. It's basically just honey glazed popcorn chicken. So deconstructing those things is really interesting because if you were to remove all of those American qualities, there's not a whole lot that's left. So essentially what we're doing is reimagining an American classic in the lens of Chinese food, and like if it was actually Chinese food. So those are really, really interesting because what we're essentially doing is recreating an entire recipe. So super interesting to do. If you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over on YouTube and lots of fun content popping up over there. The new recipes, those are out every Friday, which means this Friday, as in tomorrow, we have a new one coming out for a Chinese marbled tea egg. If you've never had that, they look like marble. They're like soaked in dark tea and soy sauce and have a fractured pattern to it that looks like marble. And it's one of those things that I've been eating since I was a kid because they're really, really good for breakfast because it's essentially a hard-boiled egg with a couple of extra steps added. So they're like really good for food prep. They're really useful to feed like to really hungry teenagers. So when I was a kid, I used to eat these things all the time. So that's going to be really fun. Beats using kitchen sound. Oh, that's a really good idea. I could totally do that. All right, let's check this out. Yeah, super tasty. Like real nice crispy veggies because of that batch cook. A lot of interesting layers of umami and like some like really interesting flavors that are coming from all of the different things that we've added. So I think that spicy black bean paste is doing a lot of work in like creating a really interesting flavor that you probably have not come across in a traditional Chinese stir fry, or like in a traditional Chinese or like Chinese American kung pao chicken at least. Definitely not something that you would taste in Chinese food or Chinese American food. I just remembered I forgot my garnish. So the last thing that we're going to do, we're going to add a couple of things. The first thing is going to be our Szechuan Peppercorn, which I'm going to toss in. I love adding Szechuan Peppercorn really, really late, like as in like right before you serve it, because what happens with Szechuan Peppercorn is that once it makes contact with hot oil, that's when it starts releasing flavor. If you add it too early, it will release and then it will get buried into whatever it is that you're stir frying. So I love adding it super, super late so it doesn't get buried too quickly. And then the last thing that we're going to add here is our garnish. So this is the greens of our green onions. That ought to do it. That was close, I almost forgot it. Alright. Cool. So that's it, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Super stoked to see so many people popping up all the time. I know I've seen a lot of familiar faces coming up, especially over on the YouTube channel. I see a lot of familiar faces coming up all the time. Super exciting to see so many people coming back all the time. That's really fun. Always super fun to cook with people too, so if you're interested in cooking along with me, that's super fun. You can pick up some of those ingredients and then we can talk about how we're cooking, how's it going, how much have you messed up. I know I messed up at least one thing today. I messed up two things. I literally just made a mistake. So super fun to cook with other people, so if you haven't tried it yet, feel free to check out what's going on over on the YouTube channel and you can pick up some ingredients. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't checked it out yet, if you're watching on Reddit and you haven't checked it out yet, hop over to YouTube, check out what's going on over there. In addition to that live stream schedule, there's also all of the recipes that are coming from these streams, so you can check out what's going on. In those recipe videos, I usually move a little bit slower and we kind of talk our way through some of the decision making that goes behind the recipes that I'm writing, and like why I add certain things, why I leave some of these things out. Like what's going on when I like make the decision making behind how I assemble a recipe. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to YouTube and check out what's going on over there. Okay, I'll see you all soon. We're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. So we'll be back real soon. I believe the next stream will be on next Tuesday. So we'll see you soon. Bye everyone.
time to give a little to the kids in the middle, but oh, until it falls, won't bother me.
To say